they needed me to fill this vacancy. That was part of my job. And I just didn't know what to do. And I wanted, somebody exactly like myself to be renting it, but like the tenant demographic was definitely not that. And so um, I just felt that pressure, and I ended up getting some people who came in and they're like, yeah, we were looking for a place right away, and we can move in right away. And like a couple of red flags now that I think about it, how the story unfolds. But I just red flag after red flag after red flag.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Homeownership Podcast, the real estate investing podcast for Canadians. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, you've come to the right place. If you're looking for a way to take control of your life through real estate investing, stay tuned and be sure to join us at cwho.ca, your hub for all things real estate investing in Canada.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Commonwealth Homeownership Real Estate Investing Podcast. This is Phil Wong, and today it'll just be me. Brad, unfortunately, cannot join us today. He's otherwise predisposed. But joining us today, we have Adrian Nedelik. He is a realtor from Mogul Realty Group based out of Edmonton. And he's here to talk a little bit about his journey as a real estate investor, as a realtor, and kind of the major lessons he's learned along the way. And hopefully some of our listeners can take some of those lessons and help them move forward in their own journeys. So welcome, Adrian. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, super excited to be here.
So before we get started, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, sad to not see Brad here, but I know we'll definitely hit it off, Phil, to chat a little bit, and we'll give him a couple jabs for not making it happen. But all good. Excited to be here. So, yeah, about me. So, I've been a real estate investor for the past about 7-8 years now. I started just through the kind of investing, house hacking mentality, and that's how I kind of got into the framework of real estate investing, which really progressed my career. And I ended up getting licensed as a realtor, joining a team in Edmonton who focuses mostly on investment properties. And I joined a gentleman named James Canal, and I've been with him for the last almost 5 years now, which is crazy. Time just flies by. And so progressed from just being a realtor on the team to being a sales manager to general manager, and now a business partner and partner at Mogul Realty Group.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations, by the way. That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's it's crazy. It's kind of surreal because it happens so fast, and you see the progression of how things come together, and it's cool. I'm really excited of where we are and how we're building this team, and it's just more and more people and our teams being bigger and bigger as we keep going. So that's pretty cool.
That's awesome. So, I understand that James spends a lot of time in Vancouver nowadays, right? Kind of getting that branch up and running.
Yeah, exactly. So one of his big, you have had James on your podcast previously, and I don't know if you ever talked about his kind of 4-hour work week mentality.
We did, yeah. We're both a big fan of Tim Ferriss. So.
He's a huge fan, totally, and I am as well. But ever since we started, that was something that he talked about, being able to basically have play in the afternoon, work in the morning. He lived in Whistler. And after that experience, when he came back to Edmonton, his big plan was to eventually grow his team big enough that he could move to Vancouver. And I know he didn't have a plan whether he wanted to open up shop in Vancouver, but things kind of progressed and ended up getting to that point of saying, I think I want to move to Vancouver. And with COVID and everything, it just ended up being perfect timing. So he set up shop, and we got a couple great partners in Vancouver, and I've basically been able to take the steer of the ship in Edmonton. So it's been fantastic.
Okay, that's great. So when you got started, like before you got started as a realtor with Mogul, what was your background before that? Did you have another career before you transitioned?
I did, yeah. So I went through kind of the university channel after high school, just not really knowing what to do, but I knew I wanted to get some sort of like higher education. So I went through and got my Bachelor of Commerce. And from there, I also just didn't know what the plan was. So I looked at my parents and saw what they were doing, and my dad was an entrepreneur and had his own business, and I just never really wanted to be kind of in the shadows and follow his footsteps. I wanted to kind of pave my own path. So
Okay.
I saw my mom. She had a pretty stable job. She's, both my mom and dad have always been in some sort of sales role, and I thought, hey, I might as well give that a shot. So I got a job with a company called Simplex Grinnell at the time, which has been purchased by a company called Tyco, and then it has again been purchased by another company called Johnson Controls. So I was selling preventative maintenance contracts for fire and life safety systems. So
Okay.
in higher education, and then healthcare, and then I transitioned into the industrial sector.
So what then drew you to real estate?
That's a good question. It's yeah. I always look back at it. I'm like, what was it? And one of the biggest things from learning from my parents, from what they were able to achieve and what they were able to do. Like I mentioned, my dad has always been an entrepreneur. He had a business that he started when he was in his 40s, which was a hearing aid company. And so even though that was a good business for him, he said that most of his wealth was created through just real estate. Some of the decisions that they made ended up helping him get to where he's at. And so I kind of saw that as, a path of something that interested me.
Mhm.
And I also I was a HGTV junkie. I loved watching like Scott McGilvery and some of those HGTV shows. And I've always been a very hands-on type person.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I was like, oh man, I would love to do something where, I could renovate a house and I can add value. And I just saw that system that they were doing. And at the time, my girlfriend, now wife, she called me as I was, I think I was still in university at the time. And she's like, hey, Scott McGilvery's coming to town. And I was like, no way. Like, where do I get my autograph, my photo? Because I had a pretty big man crush on him. So I ended up going to one of the events, and the way that they kind of like pitched it, very, very cool, very interesting way that they did it. But they get you hooked on a 2-hour seminar, and they give you just enough information for you to be, to just, get that excitement, get that buzz. And then they sell you on a $500 weekend course. And same sort of thing. It's Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday. And Friday, Saturday, it's just filled with amazing information, just enough information to get you in trouble, but not enough to really feel confident to pull the trigger and that you know everything.
Mhm.
Sunday was the big sales day. So they pitch you on kind of like a coaching program, and really getting into joining the company and joining the coaching program. So I brought my dad along. I dragged him along, and I was like, yeah, we should like come check it out with me. And so I went there and ended up signing up for a membership, and that was kind of like how the first progression of getting into real estate happened.
Okay. Did you find that? I mean, I think it's Key Spire, right? That they program that they. I don't know
Yeah.
if they called it that at the time when you joined.
Oh, like it was so long ago. It's funny. I always say Keyspire because most people have signed up. They signed up in the last, couple of years.
Hmm.
But when I did back in the day, well, it feels like back in the day now, but it was called Lifetime Wealth Academy.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you find that that stage of your education helpful? Like, did you learn a lot from that program, and to get you where you are now?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely gives you that confidence to pull the trigger and to you get pushed into this room full of people who want to do the same thing as you. And it's similar to the communities like Keyspire, Rain. There's smaller events in cities. So, we do one called Mogul Mastermind. There's
Mhm.
one in Vancouver called the Real Estate Action Group. And
Yeah,
you're,
we do one here in Calgary too with Sihu as well.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
just,
it's little,
it's
yeah.
so good. And because you get pushed into this group of just like people who are like-minded, people who want to do exactly what you're doing, people who've already done it. So it just gives you that boost of confidence
Mhm.
of, like, I'm not crazy. And especially when you talk to people who don't do real estate investing and you want to be a real estate investor, you of course get all the horror stories.
Yes.
Sure, it's probably been similar to you, like when you got started too, right?
Well, I mean, I was a little different. I mean, I was similar to you in some ways because I saw my dad kind of get into real estate as well when I was a little bit younger. He was in his 50s, and for the most part, he was a bit of an entrepreneur. He had his day job that was a stable day job, but then he would try to start little businesses on the side.
Right.
And some of them, a lot of them never really went anywhere. They kind of did okay for a while, then they kind of folded and they kind of started another one. And then but wasn't until he and a couple of his friends kind of did some joint ventures on some real estate. And they were in the 50s, so they had built up some assets by that point. So they were able to buy a couple apartment buildings, a number of like houses. And within 10 years, he was able to retire relatively early at 60 years old.
Wow. That's a
Just
huge progression from 50 to 60, and then being able to obviously, you said he built up some assets, but helping, retire through some of the real estate assets that he purchased at 50. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, like he didn't arrive in Canada because he was originally from Vietnam. He didn't arrive in Canada until he was in his 30s. So, he had, he started with nothing, starting from his 30s, and so then, but through real estate, within 10 years, he was able to, get enough equity from his properties to be able to, the three of them, him and his two partners, they were able to sell most of their assets, sell all their assets, and basically retire at early retirement at 60 years old.
Wow.
So then I saw that. And then, so then real estate itself wasn't, it's funny because I wasn't actually into real estate at the beginning. I was more into stocks and those kind of things,
Right.
and more in the market. And then it was my dad who kind of convinced me to get into real estate because
Right.
he knew what it did for him.
Wow.
So when I started, it was actually encouraged to go into it versus some other people, I guess.
That's crazy. It's incredible to hear too, like you mentioned that your dad is from Vietnam, and it's insane. Like being a realtor, I do see a lot of stories that come up from people who come from different countries. They're new Canadians, and the amount of hustle and drive that these people have to build a life for themselves and their families and to build a legacy, it's unbelievable. And it's I just look at that, I'm like, you guys are incredible, like for just plopping yourself into a new country and just figuring out the culture and economy and family and just everything, and then taking a risk and either buying a building or a business or starting something. It's just, and then taking care of your family and doing all that stuff. I'm like, that's incredible. Like people who are born here have a leg up already just by having the connections and knowing people. Throwing yourself at 30 years old into a new country and then figuring it out and then being able to get to, like you said, where your dad is, that's super cool.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of it came from the adversity too, right? That he had to experience growing up during the war and everything as well. That he kind of grew up being stuck in the middle of this 30-year war.
Right.
And so then, so I think the adversity helps. I think the adversity helps a lot. And I think that it's important to put yourself through situations where you kind of experience a little bit of adversity just to allow you to push yourself a little bit further than you otherwise would.
Mm-hmm. I think adversity is something that, I mean, it's definitely like a buzzword, and you hear it a lot, especially when you have people like, like the Gary V's and that sort of people who are like, you got to work all these, like you have to work 30 hours, and you got to do this and this and this, and respect the grind, respect the hustle, and but it's real, like the adversity thing that you talk about. It's it really pushes you to that next level to be able to um, look at that situation and find a solution. And before, if you have the opportunity of a bailout, you know you always know in the back of your mind you have that opportunity to get bailed out. But when you
Mhm.
don't and you face that adversity, that looks like either I have just this clothes on my back and that's about it. You got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And taking those risks is such a bigger leap than if you have a bailout at the back end. So, trying to make decisions knowing that like I have no other option than this, I think it's super, like, I think it's amazing to go through that to get to the decision that you need to make because,
Mhm.
yeah, it's super important.
Well, I'm at the same time, I'm grateful that I didn't have to be put in such a situation where I literally had no choice, right? I mean, it's either you're stuck in a war-torn country or you leave. And when you leave, you are forced into a situation where you have to figure it out. You have no other choice. It's either you do that or you die.
100%.
So I think I think it's less of a choice as opposed to a lack of options at that point.
Yeah, of course.
But nevertheless, if you can make it through, I think that would definitely add a lot of notches to your adversity belt, so to speak.
100%. And I think, like, obviously, talk about how privileged you are to not have to make those decisions, right?
Hmm.
It's amazing to be in a country that you're just, you don't have to think about that. You wake up in the morning and it's something we don't have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So, I mean, I guess, I mean, going to real estate, like, what made you decide to be a realtor from just as opposed to just a real estate investor having a side job or having your full-time day job and then being an investor versus going all in to be a realtor?
yeah, um, I think that, so for me, I got to a point where I was at that job that I mentioned,
Hmm.
where I was a sales rep. I had a base salary, had commission, I had a company car, cell phone, gas card. Really was able to limit my expenses by having all those perks. And I I looked around the office one day and I just, I started to just feel kind of like anxiety. It's something I never really felt too much. And I looked around, and I was just like, I just don't feel fulfilled. I'm not getting any purpose out of what I'm doing anymore. And I need to figure out what this changes. And for whatever reason, I just didn't know. I knew I needed to change. I knew I needed to do something different, but I didn't know what path I wanted to go down. And I was already, working. I already had a couple properties at this point. I did couple successful joint ventures, and I had that going for me. But I didn't think it was going to be lead me down a career path. And I had people who, asking friends and family, hey, like, what should I do? I'm at this point where uh, I'm not. I don't have I don't have like a family. I don't have kids yet. So I have the opportunity to take a pretty big risk and still have that, that time to bounce back. But
Hmm.
I don't know what I want to do. And I want to make the right decision for myself. I don't want to just go down a path that's going to take me a couple of years to figure out. Again, it's something I don't want to do. I want to be able to take that opportunity of time that I have and make a decision so I can have a career that I really enjoy and really take that opportunity now. And so a lot of times I talk to people and, they knew I had this real estate stuff going on and this investing thing. They're like, well, why don't you be a realtor? It just seems like an obvious choice. And I always just, I don't know, pictured the greasy, realtor. I feel like a lot of times realtors just get a bad rap. I don't know what it is. It's kind of like you always think about like salesperson, used cars, greasy salesman. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just like had that in the back of my mind. I'm like, I don't know. I just don't want to do that. And so I really struggled with trying to figure out what I need to do. And then eventually I came back and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take the course and I'm just going to kind of just go with it. And so I I ended up taking the course. And actually before that, I thought about being a police officer. I was like, you know what, I can give back to my community. And so I looked through the process. I did a ride along. I'm kind of like an adrenaline junkie. So I thought that, hey, it might be a good career choice for me. And I soon realized it probably wouldn't be a great fit. And and so then I got my license after I figured out policing wasn't going to be the option for me. I ended up, ended up just getting my license. And then at that point is like, where do I go from here? Do I go a solo agent? Do I do I join a team? Do I focus on, what part of the segment of the market do I choose? So, definitely a couple of choices in there that I had to figure out what I wanted to do.
Okay. So I guess which path did you finally decide on? Did you try a couple before you ended up where you are now?
Well, yeah, it goes back to, for me, I saw James. So
Okay.
when I was, so actually I used James as my realtor previously, before I before I got my license. So I had a joint venture partner. We were looking for properties. I got introduced to James through a friend of mine. They went to university with him. And I just heard his story and I saw him at his young age, having 200 plus doors. And I knew as a client, I was like, I need to learn from this guy. How can I figure out, this guy's in his mid 30s and he's like hit all these numbers. And I know for you, there's kind of that ego part to getting doors. And, you hear these door counts and you kind of like put a number to it and you're like, I'm going to be successful when I get 10 doors or 50 doors, or I'll be a multi-millionaire when I get 100 doors. And so going into the room like that, that's always in your mind, right? I don't know. How was that for you too? Was that something that, or is it just me?
No, absolutely. At the beginning, like, when you go to some of these, real estate investing events and you talk to these people, like 300 doors, 400 doors, or whatever it is, or even like 50 doors.
Yeah.
And you look at them and you're like, man, like you're either my age or a little bit older than me, and you've already accomplished like that much, right?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit intimidating. I mean, truth be told, it's and then at the same time, there's a bit of ego that you want to, when you get started, you kind of want to, it feels like a competition.
For sure.
Right. And now that I've done it for a few years, you gotta have to keep reminding yourself that everybody's situation is different.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has advantages and disadvantages that they go into this game with. And just because they can get 200 doors, because they have you don't know how their life was set up before they went into it. And you don't know who they know, what they have, the resources they have. And so I feel like it's a very self-defeating game if you maintain that mindset, just because then if you don't get there, then you feel like a failure.
Yeah.
But then you have to, I feel like you have to take a step back and look at what your goals are, what our own goals are, in terms of what income are you aiming for and all those things, and then just set a number for yourself and try to hit that number, irrespective of what other people are trying to do in their own careers. Right. Sure. So I totally know what you're talking about, though.
Yeah. And 100%. I think the other thing too is, one thing that they don't ever talk about in those rooms is what's the percentage of what you own? Because you can own 100 doors but own 10% of them, or you can own 10 doors 100% of them. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference, and I would rather own 100% of 10 doors than 10% of 100 doors. And that's something that never gets talked about either. So it's interesting to say, when you look at that and what's the most important thing. So it goes back to the number is cool, but also what's it doing for you? What's the purpose of getting there? Mm-hmm. To bring it back to that, so I saw James and he was talking about he was on the stage, and I got introduced to him. I'm like, man, I really want to work with this guy. Seems like he's been able to hit some of these milestones that a lot of us want to hit, but he did it at such a young age. So he was my realtor. I was getting my license, and I sat down with him, and he had no buyers agents at that point. It was just James Canal Real Estate. He was doing his thing, and I thought to myself, I really wanted to be in just an investor focused team. I knew that I had this niche of investor focused. I saw the success that James had not only as an investor, but as an investment focused realtor. And I thought, I don't always want to be a realtor. I eventually want to build a business. I want to be able to build a team around us and be able to just build that up. So I looked at a couple other teams that had some of that niche, that had some of that investor focused kind of flavor. And they already had some buyer agents, they already had a team under them. And when I looked at James, he was just kind of starting his journey of creating a team. So for me, it was more a strategic play. And then I also just, James and I got along great. So it was really just it molded really well. But it really helped kind of pave the way for me, investing, because it just it gave a ton of opportunity for me to just continue learning and being focused on investment properties day in and day out.
Okay. So since you've become a realtor, how has your perspective on sales changed? Because I know you said before you went into it, there's always this stigma of greasy used car salesman.
Yeah.
So how has that changed now that you've been doing this for a while, or even when you started, for that matter?
I'm just kidding. No, they're still all greasy. No, I'm just teasing. Well, when I first, because I always thought, like, it's the people, like, I got my billboard on every corner, and I have bus benches, and that was like, I just never wanted to have that. I wanted to just kind of be successful kind of under the radar, and that's how I've always kind of operated. So my idea, like, definitely with being a realtor, there's a ton of realtors in the city. In Edmonton, we have about 3,600 agents. And so they're not all painted equal. Obviously, having a realtor is really important. And I think making sure that you have somebody who's educated, that's in your corner, especially for somebody who's done something that what you're planning to do, is super important. So there's definitely that value there, as in a sales aspect, by having somebody who's going to be, they get paid for what they do. And obviously there's can be debate on, with how house prices have increased and commissions have kind of stayed the same. And some people say that realtors get paid too much for what they do. But there's moments where I just had a conversation with a client, and he was saying how, his last transaction, it got really hairy, and there was a lot of leaning on the realtor that he did. And so, I mean, it depends on the situation, on how people feel, if that realtor earned the commission that they got paid. But I think at the end of the day, for me, like, the realtor aspect, it doesn't feel greasy anymore. It wasn't this stigma that I had. Obviously, there's great people in the business, and there's other people in the business that can make a bad name, but it's all about finding the good people.
Okay. So just to follow with that question, what makes a good salesperson, in your opinion?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. What makes a good salesperson? So even though, like, as a professional, as an accountant, as a lawyer, there's fiduciary duties, there's things that you need to do as a professional. But in the realtor business, there's commission involved with that. And everybody knows that realtors get paid. But really being able to take yourself away from a commission check and really dive into exactly what is the purpose of why that person is using you, and what you can do to help them achieve the goals that they have. So whether that is from, like in our business, a lot of people just assume we just do strictly investments, but we don't. We do, if grandma wants to sell her condo, or you have a friend and family who wants to downsize or upsize, we do homeowners, we do investors, we do like commercial, we do all those sort of things. So
Mhm.
it gives us the nice kind of opportunity to deal with different types of people. And it really just goes down to figuring out exactly what that person needs. And I know it kind of cliche to say, but really understanding the need of that client is the most important thing for sales. And I find a lot of people, like, they push their own agenda first and what's in their best interest versus what their client is. And the way that we do it, we really dive into what we call our buyer intake. So anytime that we have a client, one of the first steps that we go through is, yes, of course, we're going to have a conversation about what you need and what you're going to go through. But similar to, you've been to Rain, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So they go through the Belize.
yeah.
Like, you go to the acre event, and that's kind of like the main thing that they focus on
Hmm.
for like the first part of the morning, and it really sets the stage for the rest of the weekend.
Hmm.
Very similar for us in when we intake a client. And I think if you can revolve your sales around that, diving down into their beliefs and why are they making that choice, if you can understand them from that perspective and know how they tick, I think that's the most important thing in sales.
Okay, cool. And just so for our builders who are not familiar, or sorry, for our listeners who are not familiar with what the Belize is, it's basically it kind of comes down to your ultimate goal, like your ultimate why you want to pursue real estate or any other vehicle for that matter as a form of wealth building. So
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And even from, we talk about when let's say that we do an intake meeting with somebody who isn't an investor. Investing is not even part of the picture, but they need to change.
Hmm.
Like, you really want to understand, why are they making that change?
Hmm.
Why are they moving? What's the point? And understanding some of those pain points for them. Because when you get into the moments where you're going through expectation setting, whether it's going through the property during an inspection, or size of the bedrooms or whatever it is, if we set the expectations from the beginning, it helps everything go smoothly. But if you understand those pain points from the reason why they're making that decision, you can have a conversation to them and just say, okay, well, the reason we started looking at these houses was because, you know, you grew out of your last space and you were sick of hearing your wife on her Zoom calls while you were trying to. So, like, let's figure out what makes sense for this next step for you. So that's kind of the way that we use the Belize, and for us we call it our live well.
Hmm.
So it's kind of bringing in that Belize into our everyday life and kind of sprinkling it throughout, not just getting this like end goal of this why, but being able to like enjoy it throughout our life.
Hmm. Okay, good answer.
Thank you.
So I guess as you like as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to kind of focus on like the major learning points. And that was a really good one. But what in terms of your growth as an investor or as a realtor, were there like some major milestones or lessons learned you feel that other people would benefit from in terms of not making those same mistakes again, or something that you some epiphany that you had that you feel that would further someone's journey a little bit faster?
Oh yeah. Um, okay, I got two things, definitely two things.
Okay,
So if I go on a tangent, remind me on the second one.
got it.
Uh, First one was getting, obviously when I was young, I started at probably about 23
Okay.
when I got started. So I was pretty young. I felt, I needed to wear a collar shirt when I was going to these networking events. And the reason I went to like Keyspire and Rain and some of these other events was I ran out of money. I'm like, how do I continue growing my portfolio without having money? And, they obviously talk about getting into those joint ventures and all those sort of things. But I was so nervous to go and just like get out there and speak to people and to talk about real estate and to put myself out there in that, networking environment. I know, like, you have the hardest part was break time. You would go to these events and break time. Okay, now go like take the hand of like 10 people you haven't met before. And I'm like, oh shit, like, okay, now I gotta go and like talk to people and like, hopefully my palms aren't sweaty and all these things you think about. And you're
Mhm.
like, well, I should get a coffee and maybe hit the bathroom for like 15 minutes, and then we'll go back and maybe it'll be back on. So for me, it was so I kind of got past that in a couple ways. I had a friend who was, very, very good at sales. He was just, born an extrovert. He just, everything that he had to do, he was super successful in a lot of the businesses that he created back when we were in university. And so I had this idea, I had the knowledge of real estate investing, but I didn't necessarily have all that confidence to go out and to meet people and to pitch the ideas of what we had. So
Mhm.
I brought him on and we kind of started this, partnership in this company that we wanted to like, buy these properties and do a bunch of joint ventures and have 100 doors and all these things. And so for me, it was just like partnering with the right people and being able to create a team to give me that confidence to get out there and do things that I wasn't great at. But I had to push myself enough in those moments to feel like I could do it myself. And so that would be probably the biggest one is like create the team around you that's going to help you push to that next level. And that's from investing and that's from realtor and that's in personal life. Like there's so many avenues where I look in my own life and I'm like, I really got pushed to like, be better in this situation and trying to find someone who's a little bit better or even like just better at you at any sort of thing. You're going to strive to hit that level that they're at. So it's, that common saying is you want to, the 5 people you hang around the most is who you're going to become. So we're
Mhm.
really trying to emulate that and put that into perspective. So that would be number one.
Okay. So, I mean, I just want to clarify a little bit. So, by getting together with this friend of yours that was really good with sales, that's kind of how you was able to kind of boost your ability to communicate confidently with others. Is that it?
Yeah.
Or
So yeah, we we would go to so I don't know if you've ever like when I got started, 7, 8 years ago, I would look at anything that said real estate in it, I would go there. And we would, some of those like American ones like flip this house and you would see it like in the back of a newspaper, like something silly, you get this a Facebook ad or something stupid like that. We made an agreement to ourselves that we would go to every single one of those events for like a duration and we would go there, we would sit separately and we would try to talk to as many people as humanly possible to be like, yeah, we do this thing called Burr and this is why you should partner with us. Basically is what we did. And so if it was by myself, like I wouldn't have that accountability partner. I'm sure I probably would make excuses for myself being like, oh yeah, no, I'm tired or something else is coming up. And it's not usually at the most inopportune times.
Mhm.
It's Saturday and at 11 a.m. or whatever. You got something else going on. So yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
No, I mean, I was very similar. I didn't go do anything in the States, although I listened to a lot of Bigger Pockets. I think I probably went through a few hundred episodes of Bigger Pockets. I felt like during that time, I kind of listened to everything and read everything I get my hands on in terms of real estate. And then every little networking event that shows up on Meetup or whatever it is, I usually went to it. But I didn't have an accountability partner. I found that was hard though. I'm also a bit of an introvert and extroversion, the ability to kind of get out there and talk to others, is very much a learned behavior for me. It's not something that comes naturally. So it was a lot of kind of fake it till you make it kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
You say the words, you make the eye contact, you do the smile, you shake the hands, but it's very uncomfortable for me at the beginning.
100%. Yeah, I think that's like that's so true in a lot of those things. And even when I take it back into the real estate context as well, when I started with James as a realtor, one of the first things you do, pretty much in any sales job where your network is your kind of like your bread and your butter,
Hmm.
it they want you to call your sphere. And so our job was to call pretty much 100 people within our sphere right off the bat. And I was so nervous. Same thing. Like I already did a couple joint ventures. I got through that, and I'm
Hmm.
like, I have no idea. I have my real estate license for like 15 days. I'm like, how can I tell these people what to be doing, you know? And so the fake it till you make it is 100% true. And all the new agents that join my team, I'm like, you guys got to try, because I was always so scared. I'm like, hey, I gotta close the door. I gotta make sure I'm in a private room if I'm making these calls, because if somebody hears me, mess up this bad and just like kibosh this call, it's gonna be terrible. So yeah, fake it till you make it, 100%.
Okay. So what was so that's number one is accountability partner and surround yourself with a good team. What was the second thing?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So the second thing was, so when I got started, I was super green. I had no idea what I was doing. And I felt the pressure of just, you know, I had a joint venture partner um, who trusted me to get the job done. And something just wasn't working. I was being, hypercritical towards any of the people I was trying to fill a vacancy, and they needed me to fill this vacancy. That was part of my job. And I just didn't know what to do. And I wanted, somebody exactly like myself to be renting it, but like the tenant demographic was definitely not that. And so um, I just felt that pressure, and I ended up getting some people who came in and they're like, "Yeah, we were looking for a place right away, and we can move in right away." And like a couple of red flags now that I think about it, how the story unfolds. But I just red flag after red flag after red flag, and it was like, yeah, so we need a place right away, and we're ready to move, and we'll pay you cash, and we'll take possession right after we view it, and just like all these things. You probably had similar situations, but
You know what? I've only had one bad tenant.
that's amazing.
I've only had one bad tenant, and just because of all these horror stories, I'm hearing other people's horror
Yeah,
stories. I um I kind of developed a little formula, I guess, for hunting down properties. Like instead of, because you mentioned it, you said you wanted someone like yourself renting it, but the where you had the property, the demographic didn't fit, right?
yeah,
Whereas before I started buying, I wanted people like me as well. Same idea. I wanted a young professional who was responsible to live in this property, maybe saving up for a house, a place of their own down the road.
for sure.
So then I came up with the whole idea of a tenant avatar, and to build to basically detail the type of tenant you want first,
Mhm.
and then buy the house where they would want to live, as opposed to buying a house because of the numbers, because of the price, and trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense, and that's totally the way to do it. I love that. But yeah, so we red flag after red flag, all these things that happened. And um, so people move in, and like day one, so they get possession of the first, and I'm like, it's 11, 10:30, 11 o'clock on the first.
Okay, so I feel, just
Yeah,
for our listeners, I wanted, if you can dive into just a couple of these red flags, like what red flags kind of popped up for you, and that in retrospect that you would
yeah.
have.
um so I always look at the communication style.
Okay.
Again, you have to look at and figure out exactly where the tenant demographic is. So, you're not expecting an English major to be messaging you, but they have to be able to, put a couple sentences together, and, you know, not like there's I guess, an etiquette when you're communicating via email and you're looking to purchase something, and especially when you're dealing with a person who might be your landlord, I
Hmm.
think there's definitely like a layer of professionalism.
Hmm.
And so, it was kind of a mixed mash of words, and there was no blocks, and it was just like a long paragraph with no sense. I was like, okay, whatever. I'll just. So that was like issue number one.
Yeah.
Issue number two, before I book any showings, I always, have a phone call. I ask them basic questions, just like, at first question I usually ask is just tell me about yourself. From there, I'm like, why are you moving? Who's your family? Like, what, where do you work? What's this? Just tell me your situation. And then I can kind of gauge that person based on what they tell me. And so when I asked them these questions, it was, like, we're just moving because we need to, and our situation changed, and we need a place in the next 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, I can fill this vacancy really fast. What I should have thought is like, why do they need to move this fast? And
Yeah.
because they were getting evicted from their last place and they needed a new place to stay. So that was number one. And then, or that was number two. And then number three, I think it was just the way that they showed up. One of the things I've learned, or somebody's told me too, is typically the way that you keep your car is the way you keep your property. So usually if you want to meet somebody, you meet them out on the sidewalk, kind of shake their hand, introduce themselves pre-COVID, and get a look at how they show up. And it was just, that was something that I didn't do, and it was not a good situation. And they like pull up in like the rusty old van that it looks like you wouldn't want to see by a park, and all the things that like go into that story. And so anyways, they come in the house and I show them around, and they're like, yeah, well, like, we'll take it, and we'll send you money. And so they sent me money, and I'm like, perfect, this is your damage deposit. Signed the lease, got them the keys, got them to move in. And then it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock on the first. I'm like, man, they haven't sent me rent yet. So I'm like, I'll, maybe they're gonna be like last minute people. And I send them the text message and say, hey, like, I haven't got your rent yet. They're like, yeah, no, I gave it to you. I'm like, no, that was your security deposit. They're like, no, that was our rent. And I'm like, okay, well, now you owe me a security deposit. So we went down that rabbit hole, and that was my like first red flag. Or sorry, that was like my fourth red flag. But that was like, you kind of just went down there from point A to point Z. So, and to kind of progress that story, so it went, that happened, and then then they started to be late on utilities, and they started to be late on rent, and then I eventually took them to RTDRS, and I won. And then basically all they needed to do was, for this situation, they just had to pay their bill. And they ended up paying it. Everything was fine. And then again, 2 months down the road, we get into the same situation. They don't pay their rent. I give them an ultimatum. They don't hit it. I give them an eviction notice. They don't abide by it. I go to RTDRS. And this time she doesn't show up for the hearing. And
Perfect.
yeah, perfect. But then she serves me paperwork too, this was a flip. I've never seen this before. And then, so it said I had to appear in court. So then this was on a Friday, and my wife calls me. She's like, hey, the tenant just showed up at our house. And I'm like, go find out what she wants. And that she served my wife, Rebecca. And then it's like, you have to appear in court on Monday, like that following the weekend. And so I'm like, wow, this is the first time I've ever been to court. And anyways, long story short, we ended up going to court, and the judge said, what's your mortgage? And I'm like, well, what does that have to do with anything? And he thought he was going to like give her a break on rent. But what ended up happening was our rent was $13.25, but for whatever reason he wrote down $13.50. And so he made her pay $1,000 the first week, and then $350 the following week. And so she sent me the 1,000 on the day, which was fine. but she sent me 325, which was our typical original rent. And because she missed that deadline and she only sent me 325 instead of 350, it gave me the opportunity to take it to a bailiff and say, hey, she didn't hit her, her deadlines. And so that was the opportunity for me to kind of get through it. So
Phew, man.
the big lesson there for me was going through that process. And I never had the confidence to go out and talk to joint venture partners because I never went through any of this stuff. And like you mentioned, for you, like you've only had one bad tenant.
Mhm.
That's more than, that's all you want. You never
No,
want
oh,
more
yeah.
than one bad tenant,
No, we had to go through all that too, with the whole eviction process and going to the courts and yeah. So once is enough.
But it gave me that confidence to be like, yeah, if shit hits the fan, I know what to do.
Mhm.
And so being able to have that confidence going through, talking to joint venture partners, and especially for people who want just an armchair investment, you tell them any of those stories and you're like, yeah, this is what I do. This is part of me being a working partner. 100%. It's like slam dunk right there.
Beautiful. I like that. That was good. That was a good story too. lot of good learning points in that one. That's great.
Yeah. Make sure you find out why they're moving so fast, because I always say that's a red flag. They need to fix it right away. Why is that?
So I guess I'm just being mindful of our time here. Before we head off, I just want to ask you, is there anything that any last thoughts you'd like to share with our audience in terms of lessons learned or advice that you like to give?
Yeah. So for me, the combination of just being a realtor and an investor, and it just depends on your audience, but for investors, really understanding, I think a lot of people, going back to that ego conversation, going back to, like kind of comparing yourself in a room of other investors and other people doing the same sort of thing that you're doing, you have to really look back at, why are you doing it and what's the purpose? And my wife and I had this conversation a while ago about what's the reason we're investing. And I just this morning got a conversation back with our joint venture partner, and we talked about a 5-year plan because we just hit our 5-year renewal. And for us, it's always been a passive income thing for long term. We want to hold these properties for 15 to 25 years and have that reoccurring income.
Mhm.
So for us, it's all about really understanding exactly what you want. And as you go down that path, it's easy to like veer off of whatever path you're on because you see that shiny object. So really narrow down and understand exactly the purpose of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think always checking in with yourself, is this decision for ego, or is this go towards whether that your beliefs, your live well, your why, really going back to that. And it really, for me, kind of humbles me being able to have these conversations with investors and clients on a weekly basis, is because I get to hear everybody else's live well and their beliefs on what they want to do. So it's great for me because it always keeps me in check. So I would be on the investor side.
Okay.
On the realtor and sales side, I would say, man, it's all about prospecting and follow up. We coach. We have about 10 agents in Edmonton, and then we have about 5 or 6 agents in Vancouver. And I typically run a lot of our scripting sessions and our sales. And it's all about making sure that you are saying what you're going to do and doing it, and making sure that you're constantly having conversations with people about real estate. And the cool thing about this career is you can get out there and you can make your life your job, and being able to merge and create those two things by just going out and playing soccer, or going out for a beer, or going to someone's birthday party and just having conversations with people. It's all about that. People try to overthink our job way too much, and they want to do these flashy marketing things and all these crazy things. just talk to people and just be humble and just understand who they are and what they're about, and always listen first, talk second.
Perfect. And if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, Adrian, how can they best reach you?
Yeah. So for me, probably email or text or call, whatever works better for people. I'm pretty flexible in the communication end, but my email is my first name, which is Adrian, and that's spelled ADRIAN @mogulrg.com. And then the best number for me is 780-966-4471.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on our show, Adrian, and and for the awesome advice and sharing your story.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it. I know that Brad wasn't able to join us, but you're a fantastic host yourself, and
Thank you.
really appreciate you bringing me on and having a good chat with you on was it Tuesday evening?
Tuesday evening. So yeah, so no, I'll enjoy the rest of your evening, Adrian, and hopefully we'll get to touch base pretty soon here.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Take it easy.
Thank you for listening to the Commonwealth Home Ownership Podcast. Be sure to check out all of our past episodes and our ever-growing library of content at cwho.ca. Until next time, remember to get out there, take action, and create a life of wealth by design.